this week's film by Alex Garland. Have you read any of his books?
I have not, no. And I thought of him as more of it seems like he has a real history of writing video games, right?
He does. So he does have a history of writing video games. I've read his first book. It was called The Beach. I remember reading that on holiday in Italy.
Okay.
And I think that it's a great holiday read, and more than that, it's an inspired title if you want to sell paperbacks at the airport.
Yeah.
To people going on holiday, just call your book The Beach.
He seems like a very on the nose titler. The Beach. I can't even pronounce the next one. Civil War. I don't think that's a great title for a film or a book, really.
You should have called his book The Great Book. That'd fly off the shelves.
Everyone to the Two Real Cinema Club. My name is Andres Lorente.
And I am James Ruzicka, and every episode on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch two movies. We watch a new movie and an old movie, and then we try and connect the dots. Is it dots or is it bullet holes this week? It's wartime. Ooh. Once again, at the Two Real Cinema Club. I was trying to figure out, this might be, do you think this is the first big film of the year, or at least big-ish film of the year, or at least sort of big-ish budget film of the year, first mainstream-ish film of the year, maybe? We have watched Civil War, which is a sort of kind of timely Alex Garland picture, which is getting very heavily promoted here. I don't know whether it got a lot of publicity in the US.
Not that I've been paying attention to. I saw the trailer in February, right before we watched Zone of Interest, so it was definitely, to answer that question before, I think it is kind of like the big opening film of the blockbuster season because it was preceding, films like Zone of Interest, and that's a fairly advanced buzz. That was February, and it came out April, so a couple months to build up.
We're pushing it fairly hard. We are comparing it to a kind of a lesser seen Ken Loach classic, a Spanish Civil War picture, Land and Freedom, from 1996. So all in all, quite a lot of shooting once again. So do you like Alex Garland? Have you seen his films before?
I haven't seen much. I saw Ex Machina.
Okay. For
which I would say you're spot on. You said he doesn't end his books very well. I didn't think that film ended very well for me.
Yeah.
I can remember it. He seems to lose control of things at some point. 28 Days Later, that's the zombie one in London, is it? It is,
yeah.
Don't remember. I did see that, but I've blocked that one out. Sunshine.
Oh, yes.
Again, isn't that another one where the ending was not very clear?
Yeah, it is a lame ending for...
Oh, goodness. We're really seeing a trend here. Oh, my God. And this one, too. I won't let on too much.
Spoilers.
Spoiler came immediately. Okay.
It's been heavily publicised in the UK.
Okay.
It's A24's most expensive picture yet. Apparently, they spent 50 million on it.
Yeah.
I think at the time of recording, box office take is about 79 million.
Yeah.
So it's heading for the black.
Yeah.
Should probably do okay. Kirsten Dunst, Wagner Moura, Kaylee Speeney, Nick Offerman, Jesse Plemons in an uncredited role.
That's right.
Relatively starry. They've got quite a lot on screen for $50 million. Yeah. Shall I start by telling you the story?
You could. I thought I was telling this story.
Oh my God! Yes, you're. Well, if we start arguing about this, we'll break out in a civil war. I tell you what, should we start? Would you like to tell me the story?
What makes you think a war between us would be civil? I'll throw one more name at you because I'm just going to sort of this is sort of a who am I moment. There's also Stephen McKinley Henderson who plays Sammy, a journalist in this film, so I think he's important too. And Jesse Plemons and Kirsten Dunst are married, I believe, right? So, I mean, maybe they got some sort of family discount, I think, is what Mr. Garland was looking for here.
He just happened to be on set that day, so.
Yeah. And it opens on the U.S. president out of focus. And the U.S. president is never really in very good focus from here on out. So he's practicing. It's a nice little bit by Nick Offerman. He practices this speech. He's not giving it yet. Talking about the Allied forces of the Western forces, I guess, of Texas and California. They've suffered a threat, and Florida, too, is in trouble. So he's trying to announce that the federal government is in a position of strength at this time when they're clearly under attack from on a couple of different fronts. Kirsten Dunst plays Lee Smith, a veteran war photographer. And at the opening, she is sort of surveying this crowd of desperate people. They're looking for water in New York City, and they're beginning to riot. There's a massive explosion, and she saves a young photographer, Jesse, who idolizes Lee. They just happen to be there at the same time. Lee and her writer, Joel, want to get to Washington, D.C. to interview the president before the Revolutionary Forces claim the Capitol. So it's been announced that they're going to get there on July 4th, a meaningful day, and take over the Capitol. So there's this question about whether the president was lying about the federal government or the U.S. Headed for victory against all these allied forces. Lee and Joel decide to make the dangerous journey to Washington, D.C. They're in the middle of a civil war. Many roads are closed, blocked, or just destroyed. Gas is at a premium. It seems like the Canadian dollar is the currency of value. Believe it or not. But they can't go without being convinced to take along veteran newspaper reporter Sammy, and Jessie, the young photographer, manages to get herself taken along on this perilous mission. Spoiler bell.
I'll ring the bell.
Yeah.
Before I do, I've got one thing to say.
Yeah, please.
Which I suppose kind of is relevant even to that very first out of focus scene.
Yeah.
So in the UK, and kind of, I sometimes read Reddit, so sue me, about films that are coming out. A lot of the comments I've read online, and even some of the kind of newspaper coverage I've read, say one of their complaints about this film is who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Who is the president? Yeah. I wish this film came down on one side or another. Doesn't say anything about what the protagonists believe. Who is this guy being the president? Couldn't they have been a bit more specific?
Yeah.
And I'm mystified by these comments because in part because I think the point of the movie is that and I think this is perhaps the point of both of this week's movies, we'll talk about this later, is that the ideas are not necessarily the whole idea about why people fight. More on that later. But also because, am I wrong to say, the president in this film is very clearly modelled on Donald Trump? Isn't he? I mean, I understood that they underline this right from the very start. He's rehearsing his speech and he's kind of saying, people are already calling it the greatest victory of all time. Yeah. It's such a kind of Trumpian turn of phrase. He's using these very kind of Donald Trump idioms. I feel like no one could possibly say, well, that guy could be Biden or Obama or Bill Clinton. It's almost to the extent that I expected there would be a character called Thundery Daniels in the background accepting money, and then and his wife called Melania would turn up. I mean, it's like it just seems so very obviously that Nick Offerman is playing Donald Trump. But does it not look like that in the US?
I think it could be almost any president, honestly. I think the important thing is that he's lying, right? He's not being fully honest. And I didn't get this until the end of the film, really, but he's not being fully honest about how his armies are doing and how optimistic the situation should be. I think Donald Trump wouldn't rehearse. He would just go up there and wing it, and it would be terrible. So I think that sets him apart from Donald Trump, that he actually cares about what he says and how he says it. So I think that makes it an anti-Trump character. Honestly, the president is in this film so little, except the beginning and the ending, essentially, that it's hard to say, what the president stands for, what the federal government stands for at that moment. And this is a very open film throughout. There's not a lot of perspective. So I agree with a lot of the things that I've heard that you saw on Reddit. But I too was a little bit uncomfortable. I never really felt like I was grounded. I didn't know who was who really in the film and what anyone stood for. But I think that was part of the point is that, and I don't want to spoil things too much, but I think that's part of the point is that you couldn't really trust anyone, correct? And that anything could happen with a reason or without a reason, and it would just be devastating. So I think that was the idea of the film. We'll probably get into that more as we discuss our afterthoughts. But I don't think necessarily Donald Trump. I think any president who lies, Donald Trump perhaps more so because he lies so much now as he did when he was president. So I see how you got that feeling, but for me, it could have been anyone really.
Interesting. Okay. Right. Well, as promised, then I'll ring the bell. The bell. Here we go. For whom does the bell toll? It tolls for the president. Continue.
So the entire atmosphere of the United States at the time is very hostile to journalists, and Lee has been here before. She's covered wars, and we occasionally see these flashbacks through her photography of other places where she's been. She's reluctant to work with Jesse, this amateur photographer tag-along, but what emerges ultimately is the classic mentor and mentee, master and student storyline. Jesse gets into some trouble early on when they stop for gas, and she sees some bodies hanging in this sort of outbuilding, and the guys that are well armed at the gas station are sort of torturing slowly these persons of interest, I guess. We don't really learn too much about anyone's political leanings or political bents at all, but we know that everything is dangerous everywhere, and everyone is armed everywhere they go. So you get this idea in this film that things could explode anywhere at any time, and in fact, that does happen quite a bit. They sniff out some action between this informally dressed group of rebels. They're in, Hawaiian shirts and khaki pants, and they're fighting the, I suppose, government forces who are fully uniformed and armed. They have crazy close access immediately, which wasn't really very well explained to me. They just find some dudes and say, hey, we're going to follow you into intense battle if that's okay with you. Yeah, sure. Make sure you get my good side when you're photographing me.
I was going to ask you, because this is a real thing, isn't it? There is a real thing, which is embedded journalism, and it actually happens. But, how does that work? Is it really reporters, crawling straight up the stairs right behind the guy with the rifle? Wearing a helmet and assuming that will give you complete immunity from the bullets?
Did they have helmets? I didn't think they had helmets on. I don't think it's like that. Sometimes they had flak jackets on, I guess, but I don't think it's that quite that close to the front lines the way this is. They are in the action, and I guess that's, where Garland wanted to put them. Whether that's actually how they report is another question, I suppose. There's this crazy close access, and Jesse gets this image of a rebel fighter dying. The journalists sort of get off on it, right? They're really into the energy that being in these areas gives them. And the action very often slows down by these sort of regular photographer conversations. They come on pretty often. As soon as they've been in a place, Jesse and Lee start talking Photoshop, and kind of slows things down in a plotless way, I guess. They quick bond in one of your favorites, the "Let me tell you who you are" scene. It happens in a stadium. They're sort of Jesse's showing Lee how she develops film in wartime situations, which is funny because she's never been in one before, but she knows how to do it on the road. And they're sheltering in this stadium with a lot of innocent people who've obviously been left displaced through the war. They stumble into this happy town, seemingly untouched by war, and they're there to buy dresses, as far as I can tell. They're really dismayed by how calm it is there, but then they sort of realize that there are snipers on top of all the buildings, and even in this world of calm, there's just this menacing presence. They also stumble into this surreal winter wonderland shootout, and just plod along after that. And then there's a very big moment where there's this car chasing scene where one of their buddies from the opening of the film, like a fellow journalist, is chasing them down in a car. They don't know who it is at first, but then it ends up, it's a buddy and one of his friends, and Jesse gets into the other car, and the original friend comes into their car, and they're going at high speeds, and then immediately Jesse and the other dude are kidnapped. And we see this armored truck go by, and they fall into the hands of Jesse Plemons' character, which is really strong and scary.
And this is the standout scene from the film, really,
Yeah,
isn't it?
I think that is
this is what you take home with you after seeing the film.
And it's in the trailer here anyway. So he's got this road gang of genocidists, I guess. He's asking what kind of Americans they all are just before...
If that's not the name of a real political party, I bet in 5 years' time it will be. The genocidists. They'll be winning votes somewhere, won't they? Carry on, yes.
Well, there's a red line under it in Google Docs for me, so I don't know. I don't think it could ever exist if it's not a word, right? He's asking them what kind of Americans they are just before he basically is executing them. And this is when Sammy, the veteran journalist who uses a cane, a stick, and doesn't want to get involved, he's been hanging back, and he comes to the rescue by plowing their asses into the pit where they've dumped all these dead bodies that they've eliminated.
And it's the one moment of genuine catharsis in the film, isn't it? I think for the viewer.
Yeah, exactly. You get
this is the one moment where you feel, I really want to see somebody get hurt now.
And these are the guys, and they face the fate they deserve, I guess. This is kind of the end of Black. He's basically the end of Act 2 casualty. Sammy dies. He gets bloodier and bloodier as he's trying to drive them to safety. So it's, we're getting in towards the end of the film. The whole thing's kind of anarchic, and I think that's part of the goal of the film. There's no real government at the time. It's also peppered with these bizarre and kind of wholly inappropriate musical montage scenes. I just couldn't figure these out. They play like a happy song or a modern acoustic ballad kind of thing.
De La Soul turns up, doesn't it, during a shootout, which is not. It really does sound like someone just turned on the radio in the edit suite and they just copied down whatever happened to be playing.
Yeah, it was wild. I mean, this is what a composer's for, I think, and you just can't always get away. Songs, I love songs. I'm a big song guy, but you just can't just pop a song into a film and hope it works because there are lyrics that you have to listen to that don't match what you're actually seeing, and that's always. Maybe there's supposed to be this bizarre juxtaposition of peaceful music that goes on even though chaos is all around us. I'm not really sure, but I actually felt like these were lost opportunities where we could have some more storytelling, which would be a welcome addition to the film. They get to DC, to even more weird musical montages, and then Lee starts losing her... I wrote down S-H-I-T. She starts losing her... her metal, let's say, her metal.
Is that how you spell PTSD in the US?
Yeah. She's been so cool all along in war scenes, but she starts to really get traumatized by it all. But she's wise enough to be the one to realize the president is still in the White House. So she instigates this sort of incursion with a small group, again, super embedded with this group of 5 guys who are ready to assassinate the U.S. president. They get onto the White House grounds. They get into the White House. Jessie makes a rookie mistake. She's out in the hallway, uncovered, and it costs Lee her life as she takes a bullet in the White House. In the process, of course, she's saving Jessie's life. It's a very sad passing of the torch, but Kirsten Dunst gets dumped from this film very unceremoniously. We never go back to her. We never see her with those last words of advice to the young photographer with her very last breath. She's just down. And we basically assume the final photographs are Jessie's as a result. So the torch has been passed, as I said. And Joel, who just wants one quote. He's the journalist, and I never believed for one moment that this guy was a journalist. But he's the journalist who never writes anything or touches a computer or has a pad of paper and pen or anything of the sort. He gets his one quote, which is, he says, "Mr. President, I need one quote." And what does he say? He says, "Tell them not to kill me." And
yes, that's right. Please don't let them kill me.
Please don't let them kill me. And he says, "That's enough for my quote." And then the guys assume, the guys just basically execute the president right there in the Oval Office, I believe it happens, after he's been photographed. So then we end on this photograph, begin with the president out of focus, end on the president kind of out of focus. It's a photo of the murderers and Joel sort of giving the thumbs up, smiling with the dead president at their feet.
Very dead. Dead presidents.
Dead. Very dead.
I thought this was the other cathartic moment, actually, that final climactic moment, insofar as we have the clearly corrupt president of the United States executed by a woman of color.
Oh yeah.
While a Latino man gets his final words. That felt that did kind of feel sort of quite cathartic to me, I must say.
It did.
He was shot by the right people.
But I wasn't sure how evil the president was. That's the whole problem. And you do want justice to be served, but he shows up at the beginning, he's making a speech, and then he's hiding in the White House at the end, and they shoot him. That's it. He's dead. I never got a sense that he was an evil president, that he had it coming or anything like that. So it felt very misguided. And again, maybe that's the point of his whole film, is that totally misguided people could go in and take out a president who doesn't deserve it, or he's not necessarily doing a bad job, or he should just be elected out of office as opposed to hunted down and murdered. And it all happens pretty easily. Honestly, I think that the White House is probably better guarded than it is in this film. So,
but I suppose the kind of the point of the whole film, the way that it starts out by giving us real life news footage, and there's a fairly early scene where Lee has some flashbacks to her career as a photojournalist, and she has seen and cannot unsee some pretty shocking, violent things.
Yeah.
And I guess sort of the point of the film is that previously we have seen the death of Osama bin Laden or Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, and they have been transmitted to us through the television screen as things that could never happen in the United States. And yet here now we see a similar ending for the United States president that we have seen for these other characters in the past. So I suppose that's sort of what it's riffing on.
Yeah.
I'm glad you kind of lingered on that quote, because we have a new feature in the pod this week, which is the Quotation Bank. I've opened us an account at the Quotation Bank.
Yeah.
It's a new feature, and there are some good deposits to be made on behalf of this film this week. Quotation Bank. So I wrote down some of the quotes that stuck in my mind. They shoot journalists on site in DC. It's one of the kind of the early quotes, which made me kind of feel like, well, that sort of feels not a million miles away from something that somebody might try and say today, even when there's not a civil war.
Yeah.
I liked Lee's summary of why they take photographs. She tells Jesse, "We record so other people act." It's it's the act of observation is her duty and not intervention.
Sure.
And then there are plenty of kind of cinematographic quotes in the film as well, though. I think, not only does it use this language of TV footage, including, I think, some real footage at the start, but also, I thought I could see quite a lot of direct quotes from other films. There's a lot of Zero Dark 30, I think, in this film. There's quite a lot of 28 Days Later in this film, which is, another Alex Garland project. And you said earlier on he likes his video games. I think there's a lot of The Last of Us in this film, so which is an excellent, very affecting game. And even things like the character names in this movie, Joel, Jesse, the way that the characters are cast. Nick Offerman is in the TV show of The Last of Us, and also in this. So I think there's a lot of deliberate self-conscious overlap there. I think he's quoting not just the words but the pictures as well.
A lot of that got by me because what I didn't see was him quoting much literate stuff. I think that was the. It'd be nice to throw some literate stuff in there too.
It's pithy.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote in my notes, this is a writer's film.
Oh.
But I think what I meant was it's directed by a writer.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think maybe he's sort of hoping the writing to take center stage. But I think as far as the writing goes, in my opinion, I think it's a game of two halves, is what the football pundits would say. Because I think the events in the film are generally pretty terrific, actually. I think this film is well-paced. I think it's brisk and exciting, and I really enjoyed the set pieces, like the campus shootout, the Jesse Plemons scene with the death pit, the scene of storming the White House. I think all those events actually have been well filmed. They're exciting and pacey and good. And the whole film does feel like a gradual sweep up towards its climax. There is a real kind of sense of momentum about it. So I think all that stuff is good. But I think the other half is the character journeys, and I just don't think they are quite as convincing. I think earlier on, I wrote in my notes here, I said this film could be called The Corruption of Jesse. And that's sort of the template that it sticks to, isn't it? You start out with kind of young, naive photographer who wants to be, wants to make a name for herself, and gradually, the truth of what she's photographing dawns on her. I mean, that's a fairly well-ridden journey. And then I suppose, on the other hand, Lee is supposed to be this kind of hardened war reporter. And at first she doesn't want to babysit Jesse, but in the end she finds her human side or whatever. And she takes a bullet for the younger woman. But all those stories seem a little bit bungled to me. It's kind of, tough woman finds it in herself to be protective and nurturing. It just sort of, it's a reasonable arc, but it's just rushed and I didn't quite earn it. And it wasn't given the space for sort of drama or reflection or resonance. It just sort of happens, I think.
Yeah.
It sort of happens because it sort of needs to happen because that's the shape of the film, rather than you feel that it's, the character's inevitable journey to make that step.
I found it to be a very random film, and I think that's kind of the point, and as a result, it gets quite incoherent to me, and I think, again, that is probably also the point as well, but I think the beauty of writing is you can bring some coherence to an incoherent situation. Like the randomness and the incoherence it's a sign of the times that we live in. And the times right now don't make a whole lot of sense. And I could very easily see something like this happening. But I think a good writer could make sense of the times that don't make sense, if you know what I mean. I think he could have brought more story world. I think for me, the story world is all about the war that's happening, but we don't have much a sense of why anything is happening. And that leads to that random nature that you were talking about. So I think a bit more context would have helped a lot. And that's where I do side with the people wondering, like who were the really bad guys, who were the less bad guys, and who were the not so bad guys would have helped. I'm not saying there's a good guy or a clear enemy, but I had no sense of where I was in all this and why they were in with one group of fighters, but not in with the other group. It just seemed to be by chance. A lot of stuff just happened by chance. And just because they're driving from one place to another, they're running into these situations that sort of happen by chance. So I think the story world just isn't there for me. I think he probably assumes, it's a civil war. It's just going to be crazy. And this is a great story world because it's something that is just out of our reach, but it's kind of possible. And it's just destruction and humans behaving really badly. But I think there's so little context in there. Like, what's the agenda for the Western alliances or the Florida group or what's the agenda of the president? So as a result, it's like I didn't care about any of the characters because they really didn't know anything above, beyond the sort of like pat nature of them. They all feel like catalog characters to a certain extent. So there's no one,
right.
There's no particularly original character. And as I said, I didn't buy, is it the Joel character? He seemed like a driver. I don't think he was a journalist. I never saw him write anything or say anything intelligent. Sammy's the veteran journalist, and he doesn't bother to write anything down or tap at a computer once in a while or say anything super intelligent or insightful. And Kirsten Dunst with a camera, okay, I guess that makes her a photographer, but you're a bit depending on the flashbacks. I think the flashbacks of photographs are kind of an interesting way of showing where she's been, but I also saw a few too many humans being set on fire for my own taste. And, it's gruesome. I think the capability, the possibility of this sort of thing happening in a country where there are so many guns everywhere is really real. And the Jesse Plemons moment, it's the best part of the film. It is truly frightening. It is totally within reach for a lot of Americans to just dig a pit and then execute and dump a lot of your friends or your enemies into it. It's just, there's a certain pathology there that is enabled by the sheer amount of weaponry in the country. So that was a frightening moment because that I could see happening very easily. And he does a great job. He's got those rose-rimmed glasses. It's quite a sight. He's got these beautiful eyeglasses.
Evil John Lennon, isn't he?
Yeah. So that was my favorite moment, but it was disturbing. Yeah, disturbingly favorite moment. Yeah.
And what I'm going to say now is going to sound uncharitable, and I've said something similar in fairly recent pods. But chilling and disturbing and memorable though that scene is, I don't think scenes like that are super difficult to write.
No, not necessarily.
Actually, I think that sort of scene is pretty easy to get down on the page, and you get a charismatic actor, and actors love to ham it up as somebody evil. These scenes are not very difficult to come up with. But I'm slightly left with the question: well, was there perhaps an earlier treatment or an earlier draft that featured MAGA hats and Black Lives Matter and which named names and pointed out talking points and had Roe v. Wade signs, and maybe there was, but I came away feeling like the whole underlying idea behind the film was about a separation of people and ideas.
Yeah,
I came away feeling like I realised, I sort of agree with you that they are slightly stock characters, and there's not a tremendous amount of dimensionality or depth to them, but I did come away feeling like I'd watched a movie about people more than about ideas.
Yeah.
And even to the extent that, I could probably take a guess at what Jesse Plemons' politics were. I could probably take a bit of a guess at what Sammy's politics were. And that wasn't necessary for me to understand the characters.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. I wonder whether, for me, the film is a little bit stronger for not actually writing down people's viewpoints, for allowing you to infer them and just see the people and not the ideas.
Could be. I mean, I'll tell you what I wrote down. I wrote down, what the F was that? That was the last thing. When the film ended, I wrote down, what the F was that? Yeah, I still think about it a little bit. It's not a film that I want to think about. It's, it comes back to me once in a while.
Yeah.
I was on a lot of planes recently. I was on some long flights. I listened to a podcast that had, it was Alex Garland, talking with one of my favorite podcasters, John Favreau on Pod Save America. Which is a political show, and I fell asleep a lot during this podcast, so I can't, but I do remember him sort of trying to pull out parties and political philosophies. I do remember hearing him say that. And I think that's effective. That is effective, because the way things are going, anyone could rise to this level of venom and vindication and just take out massive violence on their enemies or who they perceive as enemies. And again, this is a very American film in the sense that we are just so weaponized that it's tactile. I can definitely feel it happening. So I found this film quite disturbing, actually. And I think one of the reasons I found it disturbing is because there was no point of view. And I think for me, I want a point of view on it. I want to know how he feels about it and what some of these people's ideas are, because I have very clear ideas because I follow the news and I follow politics in this country. I know who Jesse Plemons is exactly, but I think you need to name it. Otherwise it just loses weight. I think it's kind of a throwaway film for me in that reason, because it could be more powerful in the sense that it could benefit from a little bit of moralizing. It could benefit from a little bit of name calling, I think, and it doesn't have that. So as a result, it's almost like scapegoating a little bit and just playing it safe, which is very odd for this film. Because I don't see. I mean, we're going to talk about the socialists and the communists in the next film. I don't see pacifists going to this extent in Civil War. I don't see liberals. I don't see socialists starting civil wars. I think this is a very particular mindset, and I think putting a name on it makes it a stronger statement, honestly. And I think it's a more truthful statement in my mind. Maybe I'm totally wrong, and maybe people would disagree with me. But I think as a result, it comes off as an light film, which is very funny because it should be a super heavy film. And the reason I'm disturbed by it is because it's so American. I could see it happening in the United States, and I would love to know. I think you do need to debate some ideas in this film. There's no debate whatsoever. It's just assumed that this could happen, and there's no sense that the next group that's coming in and actually killing a president to take power is going to do a better job than the last group. So I think it's dangerous to treat it that lightly, and I think that's why I found it disturbing, because I could see this is the kind of thing, like, not all Americans are super sophisticated. So I could see some people looking at this film as inspiration. And I think that that's why it's disturbing to me. I think if you're in another country, you're thinking, oh, this could never happen here, or of course this is an American thing. But I think in this country, there are plenty of people who are close to this right now. People talk about civil war here quite regularly right now.
My goodness.
And, I think there's one side that's much more armed than the other side. And I think to to even imply in any way that it could come from anywhere at any time is ridiculous and dangerous. So that's why I don't like this film.
It couldn't come from anywhere at any time. It could come from one place at any time. That direction over there. Look, that guy. What is terrifying to me is the notion that there may be some people who are watching the scene with Jesse Plemons and the death pit, and the thing they're taking home is, so that's how deep you need to dig if you want to make a death pit. Okay, right.
And
that's the kind of truck you need to buy. Okay.
And he's so smart for throwing lime all over the bodies. Oh my God. I mean, okay. So that's why I think it needs a point of view. And I had the same reaction to Wolf of Wall Street because I thought Martin Scorsese was just taking it too easy on these I mean, it's a funny film. I enjoyed parts of it, but you're kind of letting the bad guys off very scot-free. And I think you need some criticism. You need the critique in there. That's what I think great art. This is a political piece, so it should have some politics in it. I guess that's the bottom line. You should have some sort of viewpoint. And I think I heard him specifically say in that podcast when I wasn't sleeping, I heard him say that was what he was trying to do. So
what you're telling me is that this film is basically saying there are good people on both sides.
Ooh, there was both sidesism. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and they've even mentioned Charlottesville, right? At one point, they're like,
did? Oh yeah. Yeah, no, they really lingered on that, didn't they? I mean, yes. Well, I tell you what, if a civil war does break out, there is one group that we can rely on to come to our aid quickly and sort order from chaos. And you know who that is?
It's the Cliche Squad.
Cliche Squad.
Now that I've talked with you about the film, I wish I'd written more charges on my Cliche Squad sheet here. I've only put one. The cliche I've put down for the Cliche Squad, though, is rucksacks. Rucksacks have kind of become like this 21st century Chekhov's gun now. I think if you're in a movie, you see someone with a rucksack, and you know that something bad is going to happen any moment now.
Yeah.
If it's in this movie, it's a young woman with a rucksack who is a suicide bomber. But in last week's last time we podded, it was the Teacher's Lounge, and it was like a school shooter scenario. Basically, it's the new cinematic shorthand, and it's a real shame because I love a good rucksack. They are great bags
with good reason. I was going to ask you, which film was it that someone explains the rucksack, and it's not in the films? I heard a podcast this week, and they were talking about rucksacks, and the original purpose, I think, it's supposed to be a training bag. Like you're supposed to put weights in it and then carry the weights in order to get stronger and ready for big trips. I think that's the original purpose of a rucksack, but I want to look it up quickly here now because...
So is ruck, it's like a Middle English word for ballast or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I may have been sleeping through that podcast too, so I've got to we'll try and see if I can figure out why. But that's definitely something we saw in both of our war films this week, and I think that's what it was. It's military origins. They're built to carry a lot of weight over time and distance. Yeah. Meaning back. Ruckin is back, and sack meaning back or bag or pack. Yeah. So right. I guess it's a training. Originally it was a training sack. Rucksack.
Well, it's a bomb sack now.
Yeah, absolutely. So versatile. So versatile. I mean, it's quite an innovative film. There's not a lot that looks like this film, and I think in the history of cinema. So it does a fair number of new things, but it definitely depends on the student becomes the teacher cliche, which is kind of laughable in this film because Jessie is 16 years old or something like that. And she quickly surpasses Lee. Kirsten Dunst is her photography skills in the very first battle she goes into, and I think it moves a little. Their arcs move exactly where you think they're going to go, but they just happen to do it on double or triple time. So it happens very quickly. So it just stands out as being kind of a bad vehicle for the whole film. I think it would have been more interesting if just Jessie were in there alone and learning, her lessons. You could have focused on the one character arc, I think, and gained more insight into the whole war because, it didn't help having a cub reporter or a rookie photographer go into these scenes. I think it would have been more interesting to learn a little bit more about Lee and other than just through her photographs. So, it's interesting characters to have because they're not super active. They're just recording what they see. Right? Yeah. So it's not Or in the case of Joel, the writer, he's not recording anything. He's just smoking cannabis and partying, drinking a lot, and looking for one quote.
How do you get these journalism jobs? I quite fancy applying for that. Excellent.
It looked pretty good, huh?
I think I enjoyed this film rather more than you. I would put it in the same rucksack, I think, as Apocalypse Now. I don't think it's as good as that film, and I'm not a great admirer of Apocalypse Now even. But it reminded me a little bit of that film.
Yeah.
With that same sense of kind of chaos. Anything could happen.
I would say it's effective. It's effective because it's disturbing. I mean, it definitely affected me. I think it was powerful in that way. But I wanted a better story, and I wanted some more conviction, I guess. I felt like he's a little detached from the whole thing. You know what it felt like to me? This is a guy who writes video games, right? And it felt like that. Like those scenes were very important to him, I think. But I think there's a lot of the human scenes were out of touch for him for some reason. I think it was intentional, and I think it's a cop out for me, honestly. I think he's going to get by on. You said 3 nice set pieces, 3 nice kind of long, violent sequences that felt like video games to me.
Oh, heaven save us from the video game cop out. Right, well, let's. Should we have a break?
Yeah.
Refill our rucksacks, and we will come back and talk about other baggage adventures in the Civil War, Land and Freedom. New on Netflix. A thrilling story at great expense, layered with fear and uncertainty. Your entire evening is at stake. Based on the best-selling streaming service, watch 3 Streamer Problem. It started in 1997 as a mail-order DVD company before it grew to take over civilization as we know it. A fateful decision reverberates across the world, the greatest threat to human leisure time. Watch in fascination as otherwise intelligent people grapple with the unsolvable puzzle. You have 3 streaming services and nothing to watch. How is it possible? It must break the laws of physics. Literally tens of thousands of hours of entertainment costing you probably $40 a month at least. You're paying out for Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus, and they've just all put their prices up again. And yet there's nothing to watch. The horror, the uncertainty. Stare into the abyss of your blank television screen and watch 3 Streamer Problem. Only on Netflix and Amazon Prime and Paramount Plus and Max and Apple TV and Hulu and Peacock and YouTube Premium and Pluto and Fubo and Tubi and Sky.
Welcome back from the land of Civil War into the land of Civil War.
There's a pattern forming.
Oh my goodness.
This is our second Ken Loach picture of the pod. Am I right?
It is. Yes.
We did Kes last year, I think. I don't think we've done any others, have we?
No, I think we've talked about it, but this is it. We paired Kes with My Old School, I want to say, but I'm not even sure if that's true now that I think.
Yeah, I think we did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, this film just kind of not belong with a cozy story about school mistaken identity. So Ken Loach, well-known British socialist filmmaker, still alive. He's in his late 80s now. I think still working.
Yeah.
He made Kes. He made I, Daniel Blake, My Name is Joe, Riff Raff, Looking for Eric, Wind That Shakes the Barley. Great long bunch of pictures. I chose this one. Are you interested to know why I chose it?
Oh, James, why did you choose to pair Land and Freedom with Civil War?
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
Funny you should ask. So, I mean, there are lots of Civil War movies because we watched Birth of a Nation recently, and we did discuss some of the other possibilities. There's Gone with the Wind, Hotel Rwanda, Glory, I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
I love an excuse to watch a Ken Loach film.
Yeah.
And I remember Ken Loach's take on Civil War being particularly humane. And I think this is kind of not so well remembered. It's not very starry. It's not very widely available. In the UK, it's free on YouTube, and it has been available for free on YouTube since 2016, which is, I guess, always a sign of a film that the rights holders aren't paying much attention to. So it's kind of in that sort of, I'm not sure who owns it, limbo. And interesting. This is like a mid-period film for him. So by 1995, he had made a series of fairly socially conscious political films, and they didn't make very much money, basically. Yeah. And Land and Freedom was another one of those. The budget was apparently £2.5 million.
Wow.
Pounds. The box office for the film was about a tenth of that.
Ooh.
So they didn't spend a lot of money on it, but they didn't make very much money. I did see it first time around when it was in cinemas, but clearly I was about the only person who did.
Wow. 1995. It's almost 30 years ago. Okay. Yeah.
Interestingly, this film, I didn't realise, this film marks Ken Loach's the beginning of his relationship with Paul Laverty, the Scottish screenwriter. So he appears in this film as he is credited as Militia Man Number 5, and then he went on to write a whole bunch of films with and for Ken Loach after this film. Interestingly, also, fact fans, Paul Laverty married Ithia Bolan, who is the actor who plays the red-haired militia woman in the film. They met on the set of this picture. They are still married, I think. Yeah. Which is sweet.
It is sweet. He plays the bespectacled militiaman, right? He's sort of a ginger
that's
bespectacled.
right.
He's very young. So, I mean, if you see photos of him now, being 30 years old, he was probably, in his late 20s or something
like that. Yeah, though he had lost most of his hair already.
Yeah, yeah.
He plays a lovely character. He's not an outstanding actor, but it's a sweet kind of turn. Enjoyable to see him on screen. Well, shall I tell you the story of Land and Freedom?
Please do.
And this time it's me telling the story,
Yes, I think we've got that squared away. Are you prepared to? I can probably step in and do this one too, if you like.
No, I think I did prepare this one. I've got my head screwed on it.
I just said step in and do, and that sounds like I stepped in poo. I'm sitting at my desk here, no poo. Sorry.
You are next to a cat, though. So sometimes they leave little presents, don't they?
I should look around.
So it's modern day Liverpool, and elderly David Carr dies in his council flat, and when going through his things, his granddaughter finds letters and photographs and souvenirs from his time in the Spanish Civil War. So from there on in, we flash back to follow the young, idealistic, unemployed David Carr as a young man. He's a card-carrying member of the British Communist Party. He goes to a talk by a Spanish Republican who shows the audience a scratchy black and white film of freedom fighters in Spain. And so David decides he's going to join the war effort. So he travels to Spain. He joins a POUM militia of international sympathizers, including Irish, American, French, Spanish fighters. The POUM were the Spanish Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. I looked it up. Yeah. And initially, they are a happy bunch. They are joyful. They win skirmishes. They enjoy their camaraderie. But then some of his compatriots are killed, taking a village, and the reality of the conflict dawns on him. The militia are high-minded, they are idealistic, they are full of enthusiasm for progressive, socialist, collectivist ideas. I will ring a spoiler bell in a moment, but only after we've got to what is the centerpiece of the film, I think. It's a 12-minute scene of the villagers who've just had their village saved from Franco's army, and the militia discussing how best to share their land and to resist the fascists. But the fascist army is closing in. Can David stay true to his ideals, or will the horrors of war get the better of him.
Ooh, you made that exciting, juicy. I timed it as 13 minutes, by the way.
Oh, wow.
I'm not
Okay.
going to press. I think you probably were looking at it more carefully than I was.
It's a lot. It's a long scene.
It's
in the
a
middle of the
long
film.
scene, yeah. It's
Had you seen it before?
No, first time. I haven't seen too many, other than Cass. I don't know that I think I've seen My Name is Joe. I haven't seen too many Ken Loach films.
Right. Okay. Oh, you got a lot to look forward to. I tell you what, this film is a great example of. So it's something that we can talk about before the spoiler bell, which is the power of the opening image, because this film, maybe more than any of the ones we've seen recently, encapsulates its entire story in its opening image. It's just incredible. I'm glad that, I watched it at home so I could rewind and check again and again and again. So I watched those first 5 seconds several times. The first thing that we see in the whole film, after it fades up from black, we see 2 paramedics making their way up the stairs to the elderly David Carr's council flat. And they go past graffiti for the National Front and for the anarchists and a poster for the Anti-Racist Alliance.
Yeah.
And so in a single 5-minute shot, it's 2 well-meaning, hopeful people working together, slogging uphill, trying to do their best with barely adequate equipment, surrounded by ideological slogans and battles.
Yeah.
I think as an opening image, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Not only does it summarize the whole film, but also, and I loved this, it draws parallels between the National Health Service and the anti-fascists of the Spanish Civil War.
Oh.
So I love that comparison.
Yeah.
I am a great admirer of this opening image analysis.
Go Health Services, NHS, you guys rule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you union in some way, or are you?
I am in a union.
Okay, but you're a government
I'm in
agency.
the Doctors' Union, the British Medical Association.
Okay.
But basically, Britain has this relatively unique socialised medical system, which is the pride and joy of 99% of the country.
Yeah.
But every year that goes by, what with the current government trying to get their hands on it, it seems like a dream that we still have it. So going to cling on to it with both hands.
And some of the graffiti in the hallway, that is, the film, I assume, takes place in about 1980s, 1990s.
I'm guessing it's contemporaneous with the filming, so I'm guessing it's 1995. Although that then will be
that would put him very
60
old.
years after the Spanish Civil War. So I'm guessing that the character David Carr would be in his he'd be in his mid 80s.
80s or something like that. Yeah. Okay. And so were some of those organizations active in 1990s England?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, certainly when I was growing up in the 80s. National Front graffiti was all over Nottingham. We must have talked about this before. And I remember, I went to a slightly posh school in Nottingham, but there were plenty of kids who had that A with a circle written on their rucksacks. When I was going to school in the 80s. So there were anarchist sentiments, and there were National Front fascists to be wary of in the bus station at the weekend. So these were real movements at the time.
And there were rucksacks.
There were rucksacks. Not bomb-filled rucksacks, book-filled rucksacks.
Is there a limerick about Tom Hanks and rucksacks? I wonder.
if there isn't, ChatGPT will come up with one for us.
I don't know. Does ChatGPT do limericks? That would be great.
I'm sure it does.
Alexa.
We've already said ChatGPT does everything else that a writer can do. You were going to say?
I was just saying, Alexa, make me a limerick with Tom Hanks and rucksacks.
Are we getting off the topic by any chance?
Yes, and I apologize. Okay, go. Was spoiler bell? Maybe. What? Huh?
Should we spoil? I've got one other thing to say before the spoiler bell,
go ahead,
which is just having spoken about that opening image. I think the imagery in general is terrific in this film. It's not an expensive film,
no,
but the handheld photography, the costume design, the production design, the dusty browns and greens of the villages, like that sort of arid Spanish countryside where they're fighting, gives this film this very particular characteristic look. It's really small scale.
Yeah.
Partly because 2.5 million was a reasonable amount of money, but not very much. It's but I reckon even if Ken Loach was given enough money to make a sort of a Napoleon-sized battle scene. I don't think he would, because I think the film is sort of about human-sized conflict.
Yes.
The camera, follows the action like an observer.
Yep.
It's like it's down low. It's among the fighters for the battle scenes. There's no wide shots. There's no overhead shots. There's no kind of big establishing shots to show you what the battlefield looks like. We see as much as the characters in the trenches do.
Yeah.
I think it's been very thoughtfully shot, this film.
Yeah.
And that style of filming really informs and suits the story.
Yeah. So refreshing for me, because 2 nights earlier I had seen Civil War. I'm glad I saw this one after the fact, because it felt way more real to me in the right ways. Like the other one feels real to me in some ways, but this felt like a very human story. You're absolutely right.
Well, shall we ring the spoiler bell?
Why not? Why not?
From the top of a church peppered with bullet holes. We'll ring the spoiler bell. Here it comes.
Ooh. That sounded kind of like a bullet hole hitting a chapel or something like that in the countryside of Spain. There's a very specific spoiler bell.
I should dub in the sound of a fascist falling from the top of the bell tower. So I have written a synopsis part 2 actually, which is so I'll kind of bring us up to date. So injured after training some new volunteers how to use their rifles, David. He goes to a hospital in Barcelona. He has a brief affair with one of the other militia women, Blanca, but she is incensed when he tells her that he is going to join the Communist International Brigade. He's convinced this is the right thing to do, but soon enough he finds that he's spending his days fighting other socialist factions rather than fascists. So disillusioned, he returns to the militia. He returns to Blanca, only to find that the militia are to be disbanded. The whole Republican effort is disintegrating into infighting and betrayal, culminating in the death of Blanca as the militia are rounded up by a government unit. And then at the very end of the film, we have 2 funerals back to back, basically. We have Blanca's funeral, and then in flash forward, we have David's funeral 60 years later, where his granddaughter reads out a poem, and she sprinkles a little bag of tan Spanish soil that David sort of carried back from Spain in his red neckerchief into his grave. I found this film from start to finish actually quite moving. That kind of end funeral where she sort of fairly artlessly reads this little poem and sprinkles the soil in his grave. I've just found that really very, very humane. Yeah, and it's a beautiful moment. Beautifully staged and filmed. It's just really lovely. I think terrific piece of work.
Socialist masterpiece. That's why it's human. I love Ken Loach's politics. I don't always love his films, but I do really appreciate this film. I thought it was so much better than Civil War for me. Oh my god. Yeah, and I love the last image. I love the 2 soils coming together. So you've got, and it's very clearly done. It's beautiful because the story takes place around Liverpool somewhere for the most part, I imagine. So it's like very like nice, deep, dark soil that they're burying him in. But then the granddaughter pulls out. I think it's come back in the red bandana that the Republicans wore to battle. And then he had wrapped up some soil from Blanca's funeral, and then you see the 2 soils mixing on top of the coffin. It's a great scene. I mean, grabbing the soil it's like bordering cliche in films, but this is done really, really well, and I've never seen the 2 soils coming together like that. Maybe a little sad, because presumably she has a grandmother as well who maybe some of her soil should be in that coffin too, right? Like, we don't get much information. Does he go back and marry Kitty, for example, the woman he's writing his letters
he marries somebody to produce a granddaughter, doesn't he? And I guess you have to presume that his wife has predeceased him, because she does not appear to be at the funeral.
Yeah. But that was lovely. This is a very human film by deep contrast. I guess we shouldn't start talking about the other film yet, but this is a very human film. You're absolutely right. I'm not without my criticisms of it, but I think it's a much more. I mean, obviously, it happens in the 1930s. So the violence is just not as violent. You know, I was so happy there weren't automatic weapons in this film or in this time, because it would have been much bloodier. And Civil War is boring in that decade anyway. You know, it's like there are a lot of waiting around. They're in trenches. They can see the enemy. They can talk to the enemy. Every once in a while, they shoot at each other a little bit, and then they run out of bullets, and someone has to bring in more bullets. It's just way more real in a way that I really appreciated. And that makes it more human, because you do see there are some human relationships that develop. And I love that they're kind of oddball relationships too, because you've got this mix of people coming together to fight with the Spanish. You know, there are French in there, there are Germans in there, there are a number of British guys in there. So it's this real ragtag group. There are men and women fighting together, kind of equally, at least early on. And then later on, when the Stalinist influences come in, they kick the women out to be nurses and cooks and not fighters. So that you get these ragtag relationships and these kind of unrealistic or unbelievable pairings up romantically that are fine, because you figure that's what happens in these situations. You're stuck with this small group of people. Of course, some people are going to hook up even though they can't understand each other and don't really make good matches. But in these times when you're going to die at any moment, possibly, it makes sense to forge those kind of relationships. So this is a human film, and they're fighting for human causes. I mean, this is all about liberating the peasants and the poor, and the workers, you know. So it's a collectivist film as well.
What I put here in kind of halfway through my notes is that this film sticks to one of my favorite screenwriting principles. You know, it's a very much a character-driven drama, isn't it? It's all about the characters more than the events. So, like the opposite of Civil War, I suppose. But it's all centered around, you know, a central character who makes a choice, who makes choices.
Yeah.
You know, David, you know, he sees this black and white film and he chooses to go and upend his life, go to Spain. He chooses to join the militia, and then he chooses to leave the militia and join the International Brigade. Yep. Then he chooses to leave them and to return to his old militia. You know, he makes his choices, and his choices mean something, and the story flows from the choices that he has made. He's not an observer in his own story. Yeah. You know, and I think when you're writing a script about, especially like scripts that are set against real historical events, you know, when you watch a film which feels like it's supposed to be, you know, part drama, part history lesson, telling you about something that happened in the past, it's very easy to end up with a story about, you know, characters who are sort of the backdrop to the events of history, and they're just sort of observing in the same way that we are sitting in the cinema and observing the story. But this is, you know, absolutely the opposite. This is a story about a guy who makes some choices and does some things. Yep. And then, you know, through the results of his choices, then you get the history lesson. Yeah. So it's you know, it's simple, but I feel like we've seen a lot of films recently where, you know, this is not the case, where we have protagonists who are largely reactive instead of active. Yeah. I was kind of going through and thinking about other films that have largely reactive protagonists. I made in my list here The Boy and the Heron, where they're like the main character largely just reacts to the things that happen to him. Killers of the Flower Moon, where Leonardo DiCaprio largely does the things that he's told to do. Yeah. You know, Asteroid City, where a bunch of characters are just told to, you know, stay here and mill about for 8 weeks, whatever. It's it's not people making choices; it's people just kind of reacting to things around them. But so again, I think, you know, this is a simple principle which yields a great story in this case.
But again, David Carr he's making real decisions, and he's making real mistakes. It's not like Tom Cruise, you know, making these grandiose motorcycle trips and parachute jumps to save people. It's more like, you know, he's trying to train these guys how to fire a gun, and the thing explodes in his face and it takes him out of the war for a little while. Or he absolutely doesn't know whether he should be fighting or for which side at some points. You know? It's just very real. Or, you know, he is interested in Blanca, so he approaches her while she's still with another guy. He makes an ass of himself because he's sort of been put up to it by his buddies. And then eventually he, you know, it's very arbitrary in a sense that they end up together for just a short period of time. And then he makes her angry immediately. And it's all very real stuff. So it's highly relatable. He ends up being a relatable protagonist because he's not this grandiose action taker, risk taker. And he's also not this person who's just being told to do stuff and doing it. It's completely his decision to go to war, and it's, you know, completely his decision to just changed sides for a very short period of time as well. So he's a very real character, and I think that makes an enormous difference, and pretty well rounded compared to some other characters we've seen lately. So I think that makes a big difference.
He's a bloke doing his best, isn't he?
Yeah,
is what he is. You kind of think, and that's I know that we always talk about who am I. We like to go to the cinema to see ourselves.
Yeah,
and I think we all like to think of ourselves as just I'm basically a good person trying to do the best thing. And that's exactly what he is.
Yeah. He's a working man. That's the other thing. He's a person that everyone can kind of relate to, or certainly most people can relate to. There's also the flashback structure and the voiceovers, which you and I think we don't always like, but it's set up. There's this he's left behind this suitcase of materials that was hidden up on top of a chest for a long time, and the granddaughter finally shows interest and pulls it down. And it gives this permission structure, I think, to have him. I think it's his letters back to Kit, his girlfriend or fiance at the time, Kitty. So it sort of gives you this permission structure to bring in a voiceover, bring in his perspective and his photographs and things. So it's not a structure that I normally like. I don't want to hear a voice telling me the whole story. I would rather see things happen, but it's kind of realistic in the sense that, you do. I don't know if you've ever had a parent who's died, and you go through things, and you've got a story. It's all very conveniently in one box.
Yeah.
So, which for my parents, it would not be like that. But it's definitely a gimmick of sorts, but it works. I mean, I think you see enough of him in action and his experience in Spain that it's a pretty well told story.
It's funny, my instinct is that those granddaughter scenes are like bookends, but you're right, actually they do crop up all the way through the film, and I'd sort of slightly forgotten. I think I was so much in the moment that I kind of forgot, we do kind of see her, though she only speaks a little bit at the beginning and the end of the movie, otherwise it's, she is just sort of reading his letters to us, the audience.
I think we have to talk a little bit about the 12 or 13 minutes, though. In part, look, I love Ken Loach's politics. I love this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of socialism in action in this film and in words and in exposition. It's all over the place. And it can be a bad thing. I think it lends to it's like this sort of town hall discussion about how to manage the town. Is it going to be individualized or is it going to be collectivized? And it is, as you mentioned in your opening, it's the midpoint of the entire film. And it's long and it's talky and it's broken English and then Spanish and, it's pretty wild, and I think it's just not cinematic. It's not what you want in a classic midpoint. I mean, I kind of eat it up because that's my politics as well. But it's not dramatic, and I would nod to my old mentor Philip Palmer, who just told me when I was writing my script, because I had lots of Marxist quotes from characters. He said, "Politics is boring in cinema. You've got to really do something with it to make it special." And I think that sequence, and again, I don't know how much these things are rehearsed. I think they had probably a pretty good script, a pretty set script going into this, but I think there's definitely some improvised stuff that the actors do, and it doesn't necessarily engage you. This film almost lost me in the midpoint. I don't know how you reacted.
I did do a bit of background reading about that central 12 or 13 minute scene, actually. So a lot of it is improvised insofar as I think that they had a historical expert who then spent a couple of days with the actors trying to figure out what each of their viewpoints might be. And then the actors kind of improvised their dialogue for each of their little speeches. Yeah. And it does feel sort of fresh and improvised to me. It feels kind of quite real and heartfelt. And the fact that people are talking in broken English, they're sort of trying to express their ideas, but it's not, it's not coming out very slickly. And some people talk over each other, and it just feels very authentic to me. Yeah. And I agree, it is not cinematic. But what I wrote here in my notes is it's not cinematic at all, but it's kind of lovely. Yeah. And I did get several deposits for the quotation bank.
Oh, good.
From this scene. Quotation bank. I wrote down here, the revolution is like a pregnant cow. If we don't help out, the cow and its calf will be gone, and the children will be left hungry. Is what someone says. Well done for coming up with that metaphor. That's good. These people can't collectivize anything if they're dead, which is another. Right. And then Paul Laverty, I think, gets he gets like this one line, which is sort of the crux of the whole film, where he gives his own little speech, and at the end he says, "Ideas are the basis of this." That's what he says, and it's this really kind of quite awkward sentence. He doesn't even quite know how to deliver it. Yeah. But it's exactly the heart of the idea of the whole film, that it really is. This is a war of ideas.
Yeah.
I found it was strangely joyful to hear people discussing ideas so passionately. It's not something you generally see on screen. Yeah. And the film had generated enough goodwill from me that I was happy to sit through 12 or maybe 13 minutes of it. Tell you what it reminded me of. The other thing I've noted down in my margin here is it reminds me of the Billy Bragg song "Ideology." I don't know whether you've heard that.
I don't recall it. I'll have to go listen to it.
So look, it'll be on YouTube. Okay. So that's kind of what it reminded me of. Yeah. It's a funny thing to put at the center of your scene, of your movie, but maybe it's the right thing for the center point of this film. It's a film about a battle of ideas. Yeah. It's nice to hear people discuss the ideas. It's the anti of Civil War, isn't it?
Yes,
that's like the opposite of the
great,
other film.
Yeah, complete contrast and a great point to bring up. There's another scene that I really loved though, and it's when he's fighting for the International Brigade. He's fighting against the fascists across the street, and there's this woman who's just trying to get into her apartment building with her groceries or something like that. And she's disturbing this kind of shootout between the two sides across the street. And then there's a Mancunian. There's a dude from Manchester fighting for the fascists, right?
I think the idea is that he's fighting for the, so I think he's fighting for the Republicans who are now against the communists, I think. Okay. So I don't think he's fighting for the fascists.
Okay.
I think it's that the anti-fascists have broken up into a bunch of separate parties.
That's right. Because they do explain. He explains that in one of his letters. How all the guys who are really anti-fascist are sort of fighting against each other at one point. So they're not really sure what they're fighting for. So they get into this conversation in English across the street, and this is when David's just becomes so fed up with not knowing, who he's shooting at and why he's shooting at, but they're all yelling down at the woman because she's interrupting their fighting. It's wonderful. And then someone ends up shooting at her grocery bag to get her to pick up her bag and go back into the street. It's hilarious. And again, it's just super real somehow. And it's kind of the moment where he realizes that Stalin has sort of destroyed the party, and Blanco was right, that Stalin's sort of taken over the International Brigade and the Soviet influence is there, and he ends up going back to the village that they had taken from the fascists, where he first was working with all those guys. So, but just a funny scene, really handled really well, and just odd. And I really love that scene because it's just so much different from the rest of the film. Very odd.
And how like the left to waste all their energy on infighting when they could be making some genuine progress. Yes.
Too true to life, perhaps. Yeah.
So I saw this film when it was first out in 1995, and I mentioned to Rachel I was watching this film for the pod, and she said, "Oh, is that no passera?"
Oh, yeah.
And we still remember that little catchphrase from the film.
Yeah.
And at the very kind of end of the movie, when his relatives around his grave are kind of saying "no passera," and they do their little salute. I just think it's so human and moving.
Yeah.
I made a little note here at the bottom of my notes. I said, am I a sentimental old lefty? Probably.
Yeah.
Am I ignoring? Apparently, there are historical questions about the film and its accuracy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Apparently, the notion that the militia were given bad weapons actually is wrong, and the militia, weren't struggling with kind of bad weapons. Okay, but it's a believable little bit of the story. But I do love the characters in this film. I wrote here they are well drawn, flawed, impulsive, honest, conflicted, brave, frightened.
Yeah.
Well written characters. And that is the principal reason why I think this film is a success.
Yeah, a wealth of characters too, such variety.
Yeah.
Coming together, internationalist, not sexist. You know, the women are there too, playing a really important role. Yeah. Yeah. Great characters. Very, very much in contrast, I think, to another film that we synthesize here soon, maybe.
Before we synthesize, now that we're talking about the characters, we can at least play. We've got some good ammunition here. We can play.
Yeah.
Who am I?
Ooh.
Who am I?
I think I went first last time.
Okay, you're gonna make me go first.
Yeah, I'm just saying that because I need to make you go first more often. So,
well, I had like a really vivid sense of nostalgia watching Land and Freedom.
Oh, okay.
Not just because watching it in 1995, but so like at the very end of the 80s when I was 19, I spent 4 months on a kibbutz.
Ooh.
So I went to Kibbutz Erez, which is a name that's kind of in the news a bit these days again.
Yeah.
So the kind of the northeast corner of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
But I kind of, as a teenager, volunteered with I sort of spent a few months there with a group of other volunteers in this kind of what was at the time a sort of fruit-growing socialist utopia.
Yeah.
We were paid like 30 shekels a month, basically, which is a few quid.
Yeah.
But we were given free board and as much food as you could eat. We picked fruit and I tended beehives.
Oh.
My friend Paul on the kibbutz had an Edes España T-shirt that he used to regularly wear, which was a print from a stamp made by Juan Miro.
Oh, yeah.
He was asked to make this by the French government when they would sell this stamp. They never sold it in the end, but the plan was they would sell this stamp as a kind of subscription where people could then give money to the anti-fascists in Spain.
Yeah.
But basically, it was kind of a bunch of young idealists. We were all kind of either 19, 20. The older ones were 23.
Yeah.
I mean, we were kind of British, German, Dutch, Spanish, Danish, Irish. It was just like a lovely bunch of sort of quite lefty young people. And that is just what the militia reminded me of in this film. It was like stepping into a time machine a bit for me.
Yeah.
And I will not claim to be as good looking or as dynamic as any of the militia in the film. But I did find that it was a real flashback for me. It reminded me a lot of those kind of sort of halcyon, utopian, socialist days on the kibbutz. Bit different on that kibbutz now, I think.
Yeah, well, I love the concept of the kibbutz. I love everything I've ever heard about it and seen about it. So
it's a shame that a kibbutz ended up sort of being a bit of a sort of an underhand expansionist enterprise.
Oh.
Yes, exactly. It's a lovely collectivist socialist village of 300 people, but it's also a bit about a land grab. So nothing is ever as simple as you think. But when I was 19, it seemed simple and good fun. I'm still in contact with some of those people, actually. They were a lovely bunch. But now that I've waxed lyrical about my teenage years, who were you in this film?
Ooh. So you're every militia person, basically. Is that what that's the...
Yes, that's right. Every one of those heroic militia people. That's me.
I think that's kind of cheating, but I'm surprised. I'm going to go to Civil War. I am Sammy, played by Stephen McKinley Henderson. I'm an old writer who wants to stay out of messy situations, but gets dragged in and wants to stop driving before he gets killed. That's me.
That's your life story right there.
Yep.
I think you're in better shape than that guy, though.
Yeah, I'm not quite that heavy, but he is older. I think he's probably 60s or 70s. So it's me soon. I will be. Not who am I guess who will I be?
You will not be.
Yeah.
Out of all the characters to be in that film, he is the one to choose. Actually,
Yeah.
He's probably the most dignified and the most heroic.
And
of all.
if you take out the genocidists, then I think you're a good character. You're one of the good guys.
One of the good guys. Okay. Well, let's as promised then. Let's we'll be the good guys. Let's do our synthesis. We're going to try and draw these two very disparate films together. See how they compare. Well, after you forced me to go first, I'm going to force you to go first this time. Tit for tat.
Both films are about civil war.
No, that's good.
I think they're both harrowing in their combat scenes for very different reasons. Like the sheer firepower and the ever presence of death in Civil War, the film, is kind of harrowing. But I think for me, the boredom is harrowing, and the sort of more hand to hand combat, the closeness, the intimacy with your enemy is even more harrowing, I think, in Land and Freedom. So I think for me, like you were talking about Ken Loach and having a couple $1 million to make this film, and not putting a lot of effort. Well, he probably put a lot of effort, but not a lot of choreography, let's say, into the fighting scenes. I mean, they feel much more natural to me as a result. I think, Alex Garland he's a video game guy. So, I mean, he really put a lot of effort into choreographing those scenes. But, I mean, as a result, it's a $50 million film that doesn't really have the same power as the £2 million film, I think. Yeah. So, I think it's really interesting that he does so much. Ken Loach does so much with just a couple £1 million. It still feels like a war, feels like a proper guerrilla-style civil war, militia civil war. And it's much more effective because I know the people in that film. So I think there's just, there's something very showy about Civil War. It's somewhat reserved, and it's not crane shot after crane shot and drone here and drone there, but it's definitely, it feels like watching a video game, and I want to see a movie. I don't want to see a video game, and I feel like Land and Freedom is a movie, a proper film. Yep. There's much more story there. It's not choreography. So I'll stop there for my opening salvos, but I'll let you pitch in a little bit on the synthesis, please.
I'm going to go back to the comment that Paul Laverty puts in at the end of his little speech in Land of Freedom, where he says, "Ideas are the basis of this."
Yeah,
that's a terrible accent.
Oh, it was great.
But he really made me kind of think about what a civil war is. That civil wars are they're all about the expression of ideas through violence. Because if it's a civil war, it's not a war of accession or whatever. It's not. A civil war can't really be about seizing land or property or resources, because it's already your country. You already have that land and those resources.
Yeah.
What you're fighting about generally is ideas, either ideas about how to rule or ideas about who deserves to be there and who doesn't. But you're not kind of fighting to extend your borders or annex another country.
Yeah.
And this notion that the war is about ideas made me kind of come away from these films feeling that I think both of these films are sort of pointing out that societies are more about people than they are about ideas. Mm-hmm. I mean, you were kind of saying about in Civil War that they try very hard to avoid political standpoints.
Yeah,
they don't point out policies. And they don't go into the kind of culture war thing. That's left sort of blank, so you can just look at the people. It doesn't discuss what the two sides believe. It just shows you the people. Yeah. But sort of Land and Freedom sort of does the same sort of thing from the opposite direction. So they have this long conversation about political ideology, and people do discuss ideas. But by the end of the film, I think the story of the film has become that this ideology actually, instead of being a unifying banner, it's just the ideology is shaky and it's movable and corruptible, and it's prone to reinterpretation and betrayal. But underneath the ideology, the thing that's important to David, and I think the thing which is important to us watching the film, are the people. At the end of the day, it's not the pamphlets and slogans that he goes back to; it's the people, the comrades and the friends. I think are what he realizes are the most important bit. Yeah. So I think both of these films are sort of trying to explore this idea that people are more important than the ideas that they share.
Yeah.
But they sort of discuss this idea in completely opposite ways, I think. Our relationships trump people's relationships with ideas. That's what I wrote in my notes. Okay. Do you think is that fair, do you think?
I think it's fair. I'm going to extend it a little bit because I think Land and Freedom gets the ideas right, or at least communicates them well. And I think it gets the people right and communicates the people well. And I don't think Civil War does either one of those things. I don't think it really communicates the ideas, and I don't think it really gives us real people that are human and relatable. So I think that's the strength of Land and Freedom. The word I've said again and again is real, real, real. And I think it's because the ideas, they're clear. Maybe you disagree with them politically, but it's very clear that they're fighting for something in particular, and the people are very clear as characters, and they work together really well. So I think that's all well done. My caveat is I really don't like social realism. I am not a fan of it whatsoever. And it bugs me a lot of the time. I mean, I'm a Ken Loach fan, as I said. Love his politics, and he's made great films, I think. So he's sort of a magical being in my sense of his work and film. But there's something very anti-Hitchcock about social realism, in the sense that, Hitchcock's saying film is just like life with all the boring bits cut out, right? And social realism is leave the boring bits in.
It's in.
But if you have interesting characters, then they can they can bring meaning to the important bits. So there are times in Land and Freedom, I'm not that engaged. It's kind of boring, but because it's human, because it feels very real on a character level, then it's appealing to me, which is not always the case with social realism. I'm not, the what do they call them? The kitchen table, the kitchen sink dramas are not really my cup of tea at all. But I like Ken Loach, and I think he does a pretty incredible, miraculous balancing act of getting the ideas and the people right, and Alex Garland does neither.
Right. Yep. There should be a new screenwriting tenet. I might write this at the top of my notebook,
please.
Which is, it's the characters stupid.
Yeah, it is kind of the characters stupid.
It's the characters stupid.
Which I don't always do well, and I hear it a lot, and I think ultimately you rely a bit on the actors and the casting to get that done too, I think. But certainly the foundation has to be there in the writing. There's another thing that I noticed about this film, which kind of bugs me a little bit, but Civil War is this moving picture about taking still pictures. It's a very odd match.
Right, yeah.
And the still photography is used sort of as exposition about not only the characters' backgrounds and Lee's life and what she's seen, but also sort of occasionally you're interrupted by still pictures to tell the story. And I would almost argue that you get more story out of the stills in Civil War than you get out of the moving picture story. Because the moving picture just glosses over story, whereas those just brief moments of seeing and being able to reflect on what you see in the still pictures, I think, gives you more information. And it ends on a still photo, which, obviously commemorates the assassination of a president, which is disturbing and effective, but again, that's probably the most important shot in the whole film. And it's not a moving image. It is briefly, I suppose, but it's really a still image. The granddaughter in Land and Freedom sees all these photos of David and the comrades, but it's surprising because there's no evidence whatsoever of a camera in use at any point in the film. So again, you're getting bits of the story. It's sort of, you get so much of his story in contrast to Civil War. You get a lot of the militia fighters' stories in there, and you also see these pictures that they kind of appear miraculously in his suitcase, because I never saw anyone hold a camera or take a picture of him in the trenches and all that. So just as examples of photography, they're both very, very different films, but they do rely to a certain extent on some exposition through still pictures, and I noticed that.
This is in my limited experience of being on set. It's so easy to forget the stills photographer.
Yeah,
the stills are such an important part of making the film. Well, two films about civil wars. Yeah. One good, one okay.
Okay.
It
definitely, Civil War prompts a reaction, I think, and I've been uncomfortable with it. I've thought about it. It's not a very deep film to me, and I think it has to be deep. I just don't think it serves our time. It feels like a money grab to a certain extent on something that's zeitgeist right now, but I'll think about it more. But I'm not going to. It's not a thumbs up. Do we do thumbs up on Two Real Cinema Club? What do you do?
Yeah, I think we should come out with a percentage score. I think 68.12%. Yes. I only hope that in a few years' time we don't come back to Civil War and say, well, that film was prescient, wasn't it?
Exactly. I hope not.
Oh, dear.
I hope not for all of us. I hope not.
We have, just before the war starts, we've just got time to talk about what else has been playing at this theatre.
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to make me go first again?
Yeah, let's keep consistent. That way, next time we'll forget that you went first, and you'll go again first.
I hope so. So it has been a little while since we've recorded, actually. So I have seen a bunch of things, but I'm only going to mention one, which is that we, the whole family, sat down and we all watched Dune, which is our first ever podcast film. So Dune 2 is getting a lot of heavy publicity in this country recently. I went to see it with Alice when it was out, and we were both very disappointed. But my son kind of had never seen it and was quite interested, and Rachel had never seen it and was quite interested, and it was on Netflix, and we'd seen all the posters for Dune 2. So I was always worried that maybe I had misjudged Dune. Yeah. That maybe, maybe in the excitement of recording the first ever episode of the podcast, I had not given it a proper going over, and so many other people seem to love it. So I thought, I'm going to watch it again. Maybe there's hidden depth in that movie Dune, which I didn't pick up on. But I'm sorry to say, it's still not very good. Hasn't changed my opinion about it at all, I'm afraid. It's still, what did I write in my notebook here? It's mostly dour, sandy crap with dull characters that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, which is, I don't know, right from the outset, I'd forgotten a lot of the details. It begins with this confusing setup scene, which is narrated by Zendaya, and then she doesn't show up again for 2 hours.
That's right.
Full of people explaining the story to each other and not acting like real humans, and they all live in these strange spaces that no one could possibly live in, and these weird sort of rooms, and it's very big, and there is an impression of scale, but it's mostly dour, sandy crap. Yes, that's another 2.5 hours I won't be getting back.
Yeah,
I've given 5 hours to Dune now.
Whoa.
I hope you've seen something better at your theatre.
Well, did you write? I'm more curious to know if you wrote that in your notebook on this viewing or on the previous viewing, and you went back and unearthed it?
I have to go back and find the old notebook, see if I wrote the same thing.
I like that. It's still bad. Yeah. I can believe it. I'm not gonna follow your lead and watch that.
Very wise.
I was on airplanes a little bit. So on airplanes, you get to always see lots of films at the cost of sleeping properly. So I saw a documentary on Carlos Santana, which I liked, but I mentioned before we started recording that they cut out about 15 or 20 years when a lot of his music was absolutely terrible, but it was conveniently edited out of his life for the documentary. It's a pretty good documentary that was fun to see. And I saw another one called Mary Tyler Moore. No, it was called Being Mary Tyler Moore, which was a 2-hour documentary on the life of American actor Mary Tyler Moore. Did mostly television, but did some films. But what I realized was that I think the streamers are starting to churn out these like phoned in documentaries. Because not that talking heads are great, but it's nice to see that a person sits down in front of a camera and they take the time to introduce you to the people who are explaining these lives, but it was mostly done in voiceovers from telephone conversations. And they were for Mary Tyler Moore especially, they were depended heavily on this interview she did in the early 80s with a television journalist named Rona Barrett, I think her name was. So just I started to see, you're seeing through that veneer. They're getting kind of desperate, and people are just cranking out documentaries without putting too much care into them.
Got to make content.
Yeah, you got to make content. Yeah. I watched with my wife Ripley, which is on Netflix. It's a retelling of the Patricia Highsmith book. I think Anthony Minghella did. He did The Talented Mr. Ripley. This one's just called Ripley. It's a Netflix series, 8 episodes, and it was actually really, really good. It's done by Steven Zalian, great writer, and he's directed some things too, but I haven't heard from him in a while, but this is gorgeous. Black and white, a lot of Italy, fantastic. And it was just I liked the film, but I really liked this too. It's one of those rare occasions where I kind of really liked both. So I would recommend that. It's 8 hours of watching, so be ready for it, but it's pretty good. And it's really a good study of the sociopath that he is in the literature. So
a bit less Matt Damon too.
A little less Matt Damon. Although I think the film is really well cast. I think that's the difference. Is I don't think the casting was as good actually in this series as it is in the film. I saw Citizen Kane on 16mm this week as well.
Wow,
which is amazing. Always great to see that. and Butcher's Crossing, Nick Cage film about killing buffaloes and not much else. And I'm learning from you, James. I watched a lot of this on like 8 times speed and 16 times speed. Because I am never sitting through Birth of a Nation again at 3 hours and 13 minutes or whatever the heck it was.
2X is your friend.
I've learned my lesson. No, I went 8X, I went 16, I went big. Big X.
You did mention about the Nick Cage film when we were talking before we started recording. And I initially, because I wasn't listening properly, thought you said it was a Nick Cave film.
Yes.
And since then, through the back of my mind, I've just been entertaining this idea. What if you took Nick Cage out of every Nick Cage film?
Oh, my God.
And replaced him with Nick Cave?
A brilliant idea. And think about the credits. All you have to do is take out the G and put in the V.
It would hardly cost anything.
And put a little CGI in there of Nick Cave. I think it'd be brilliant. It's a great idea. I think we're on to something. Someone else is going to listen to this, beat us to the idea, and then we're just stuck podding about it.
We always give away our best material. We just have time to do the socials on Instagram. We are at 2 Real Cinema Club. Read the blog at 2realcinemaclub.com. Comment on our YouTube channel or email us at 2realcinemaclub@gmail.com. Next time, we are falling over.
Oh, I love it.
We are watching The Fall Guy. Is it Ryan Gosling?
Ryan Gosling.
Emily
Blunt.
New movie, Emily Blunt, based on the 80s TV show, and we are comparing it to
The Fall. Boy, I think that's 2006. And
Tarsem Singh picture.
Yeah, very surreal. I'm really looking forward to seeing it again. I liked it. I don't know if it was good, but I liked it, and I'm going to see it again.
Cannot wait.
Yeah. Have you seen it?
Yeah. I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
But
you are right. There is a big difference between a film being good and a film being enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly. It's. I think you're going to at least be impressed by it. Let's say that.
That's 3 things then: good, enjoyable, or impressive.
And an impression. It will leave an impression.
An impression. Thanks for joining us as always. See you next time.
See you, everyone. Bye-bye.